Welcome, everyone. We're so thrilled to have you here with us. I am Yordanos Eyoel. I am a proud member of the second class of Civil Society Fellowship as part of the Aspen Institute. I'm also the founder and CEO of Keseb, a nonpartisan organization building a transnational civil society ecosystem to advance inclusive and resilient democracies. I'm so excited to be here today with two incredible leaders, all fellows of the Aspen Institute and recipients of this year's McNulty Prize Catalyst Fund, which is a prize that's awarded by the McNulty Foundation and the Aspen Institute. The Catalyst Fund supports early stage social impact ventures that are poised to grow and deepen their impact. And we want to recognize and thank all the all the generous supporters of the Catalyst Fund. And I am also delighted to share that I was the recipient of this award last year, and it's been an absolute joy and honor to partner more deeply with the Aspen Institute as well as the McNulty Foundation. Their team has just been one of our strongest champions and helping us do our work to create the type of impact we're aspiring to do so in the world, particularly during this historic time. So what you're part of today is part one of a two-part series. And we invite you to tune in next Wednesday for the second part of this conversation at the same time. Well, you'll have the opportunity to meet additional members of the 2025 prize group. So today we will speak with two of the awardees who are working to build durable solutions that are rooted in cross-sector collaboration and collective action. And we're here to explore with them, how do we as leaders respond to growing global challenges by centering community and building collaboration with diverse stakeholders? We'll open today's conversation by discussing what drives these leaders personally, first and foremost, and then we will dive deeper into a conversation on the strategies they've employed to drive the type of collective action that they are driving in their communities across issue areas and geographies. We also want you to be a part of this conversation. So as we dive into the panel discussion, we invite you to share your comments and also submit your questions via Zoom, and we will pull those into the latter part of our conversation. So feel free to make comments throughout. Great. So at this point, I am absolutely delighted to jumpstart our conversation. And as I mentioned, we want to get into this through a personal lens. Both of you are deeply passionate about the work that you do, which is why you launched your initiatives. And George, maybe I'll start with you. What was there a catalyst moment? What inspires you to do this work? When did you make the decision that I absolutely have to get this going?
Hi, Yordanos. Civil Society Fellows for Life. I'm happy to see you. And I'm so happy to be here. I think, I'm a little bit of a late bloomer. I always wanted to work in water and help people get access to water. But I thought if you wanted to do that work, as an American, you really had to do it in low and middle income countries. You had to leave the US. But in fact, there are several million people right here at home who still don't have any tap or toilet at home, and tens of millions more who maybe have water running to their house, but it's not consistent, it's not clean. I had seen this in person doing work in places like South Sudan and in Cameroon. But the first time I saw it in person in the US was on the Navajo Nation, where I had been brought to meet a community. And the very first house I went to was this woman named Brenda Johnson. And I pulled up in a water truck that was delivering water to some barrels on Brenda's porch, and everyone flooded out of the house to grab as much water as they could, because Brenda's family, they were hauling water on their own. When they could, they were buying bottled water at the store. They were melting snow in the winter. They were pulling water from livestock troughs. And then every once in a while, this water truck would come. And so, Brenda came out and she filled a pot and she brought it back into the kitchen, and I helped her carry the water. And I asked her, oh, this is great. Are you going to start cooking? And she said, yeah, I'm going to make tamales, and then I'm going to put them in this cooler, and I'm going to walk down the hill and I'm going to sell them. And the tamales are how I get gas money. And Brenda explained to me that her husband, who worked at a recycling facility, had been injured at work a couple weeks before. Something had dropped on his foot and it had become infected and actually gangrenous because he couldn't keep it clean at home. And so he had been taken in a helicopter to a hospital 50 miles away. And by the time I got to Brenda's house, he'd actually been treated and released and was sleeping on the streets of Gallup, New Mexico, because Brenda couldn't get him. I mean, no water meant no tamales, and no tamales meant no gas money, and no gas money meant no husband. And since he was the primary breadwinner, the family was in a really tough spot, economically, emotionally. And it was crazy to have worked for years in international wash, helping people get access to water and sanitation, and watch the ways they cope with that reality every day. Watch the lengths that they go to get access to the water that their family needs to survive the day. And to have that happen, right here in the US, just a couple miles from a public school and a post office and a Taco Bell. And the big difference that struck me was that in other countries that are struggling with this, countries that I'd worked in, there was this giant support system that really existed to help get water to these families, big coalitions of folks working on this issue. But that support system didn't exist in the US, even though Brenda's sort of day-to-day life looked a lot like some friends of mine in places like South Sudan or in Cameroon. The difference for Brenda was that she felt so disconnected from her own country, from other communities that don't have access to running water. There's very little communication between them, very little visibility between them, and really disconnected from anyone who could really support her. She felt tremendously alone, something we hear from folks all the time. And so, meeting her on that trip, that was the moment that we really decided to focus, dig deep in our work on closing the US water access gap for good.
It's so powerful. I'm so glad you shared that story with us. I mean, I was blown away when I met you and you mentioned that there, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 2 million people who don't have access to running water in the United States. I'm originally from Ethiopia. These issues are quite familiar in the global South, but I think it's important to highlight these issues that are not as distant as you say, that they're actually right here in the United States as well. Thank you for that. Renata, I would love to ask you the same question. Why do you do this work? Was there a moment, an event, a catalyst for launching Mosaic?
Thank you. Great to be with you, Yordanos, and with you, George. I'm originally from Costa Rica, and I've been an adopted daughter of the South since I finished college and started my nonprofit career in Atlanta, Georgia, and find myself later in Nashville, Tennessee, working with immigrant communities, Latino immigrant communities in particular. And in so many instances, the work that I was leading at the organization Conexión Américas would always put me in contact with another group of leaders, primarily other leaders of color. We found ourselves often in tables defending our communities against common threats. Black and Latino communities fighting something at the state legislature or in Nashville, Tennessee. And it was always very reactive. It was always somebody else's table. And it was always something very tactical. And I always left those tables, sometimes, celebrating successes because we did good work and we advanced, protected, or rejected whatever we were defending our communities from. But I always left with a sense of, first of all, now I go back to my own organization, go back to my silo, go back to my specific work working with Latino immigrant families, and felt disconnected from those partners that I had just been working with. But I also felt that wondering what would happen if we actually would come together, not to react or defend, but to create together and to really build the beautiful communities that we know our families deserve in Nashville and across Tennessee. And I didn't know what to do about it, other than it was always a sense of longing for more, just deeper collaborations and collaborators I think that also I realized how often I didn't feel like I had a peer network of leaders in my own city that would both sustain me and challenge me in my own growth, but also in the stewardship of the organization that I was leading. And while I was feeling all sort of seeking for all this, I also, in all those fights, in many instances, I was both in the receiving end and witnessing amazing solidarity among Black and Latino communities and leaders, but also suspicion. I also saw firsthand the beauty that comes of true solidarity, but also of separation. And so I knew that as the South was changing, Nashville is one of those cities, like many in the late 1990s and early 2000s, that was where the growth of the Latino community was very rapid, maybe still in absolute numbers. The Latino community was growing really robustly in California, in New York, in the Southwest, but it was places like Nashville and Atlanta and Charlotte where the sheer rate of that growth was really important. And Nashville, like many of these other places, were really then finding a new sense of self with new immigrant communities making Nashville and all these communities home. And that demographic change then was one that was also bringing questions to those of us who were new to the city, coming from somewhere else, but also to the city that were receiving us and hosting us, now trying to make us part of that community. Not everybody in the South, in Nashville in particular, were welcoming of that demographic change and that new diversity. And I certainly felt that the narratives of distrust and seeing the other as a threat for cultural dominance, for political power, for economic power, it was not just coming from native Nashvillians and newcomers, but also within communities of color.
Mhm.
And I didn't know what to do about it, Jordanos, for a long time. I just knew that there was something that we needed to do something proactively because I've seen and I have received and I have been part of solidarity tables where we accomplish more together when we saw common ground than if individually we would have tried to do something. I didn't know what to do about it, but I knew that both we needed to address this head on as communities of color, create a place where we would get to know each other, get to know each other's histories, the places where our struggles are distinct, and the places of common ground. And actually, it was the Pahara Aspen Fellowship that answered not my why, because I had this sense that I shared with other leaders in Nashville of the need to create something, but it was my own experience in the Pahara Aspen Fellowship that gave me the how I could bring people together. How do you bring people intentionally over a course of time, invite them to be part of a small community, to get to know each other, to develop deep bonds, and get to know each other as individuals, and also how do we support each other's work and how do we expand that? And certainly I can say then that it was both my own experience as a Latina immigrant leader in the South, feeling both the power of solidarity and being concerned about the power of suspicion and separation, and my own sense for wishing to have a community that understood the power of finding common ground and building together.
I love that. And I love how both of you bring your lived experiences and Renata, just really connecting that to not only your leadership journey, but also taking inspiration from what you experienced in Pahara to create that for a broader group of people, that especially people of color in the South. I think it's really powerful. Now, you're both really engaged in this, in collective action strategy, which, I, as someone who works in straightening democratic ecosystems, I'm also very, very passionate about unpacking, understanding best practices and lessons from across issue areas. George, I want to come back to you because at the heart of Vessel strategy is coalition building. And I want you to unpack that for us. Why is coalition building a critical ingredient in your work? What are some lessons you've learned from this? And I think it's important for us to suspend whatever assumptions we have around coalition building as we hear George reflect on this, because as I mentioned, I come from a totally different issue area, but there's still an opportunity to gain nuggets of wisdom from what you're about to share, even though my work directly does not connect to access to water. So I just invite all of us to listen through that lens and not really look at it through the issue area lens. So over to you, George. Talk to us about coalition building and how you leverage that and lessons that you've learned.
Well, that's such a great segue because I was in the background here when Renata was speaking, taking furious notes because there was so much she was saying about, finding hidden commonalities among groups of people and bringing those to the forefront and using those as a way to create connection and a shared sense of values, shared goals. I was probably shaking my screen because I was like furiously typing in the background. There's never a time that I interact with another Aspen Fellow and don't leave with a whole like notebook full of ideas for what I do too. So that story I told earlier about the woman Brenda Johnson who didn't have running water on Navajo, she's one of 30% of people on that nation, the largest reservation in the US, who have no running water at home. And there's lots of reasons for that structurally. Like on Navajo Nation, they didn't get the same investment that other communities in rural America got to build the infrastructure that we all sort of rely on and take for granted. In other places we work, like in the Texas colonias, there are policy and funding loopholes that mean that whole neighborhoods of people in these donut holes inside larger cities, don't have access to basic services that might just be at the end of their block. In Appalachia, where we work, a bunch of families used to have access to water through coal mining companies that maintain these pretty rudimentary systems. But, when that economy shifted and the coal companies left, there was no one to maintain the system. There was a sort of disintegrating tax base. And so you have, whole generations now of families that maybe used to have access to water, 1 or 2 generations ago and have lived without it since. And, these folks don't have running water because the system doesn't work for them. This isn't about, like one technological solution that we can scale across the country or one policy intervention that needs to be scaled across the country. This work is systems change work. And like often you'll hear from Aspen Fellows and I'm sure other McNulty grantees that their work is about changing systems. And when I think about systems, systems rest on sort of many actors moving in their lanes, pursuing their unique interests. It's like a big kind of quantum 4D puzzle that's constantly changing shape. But the organizing principle are all of those distinct points of view and interests combining and conflicting and bouncing off one another and influencing one another. And if you want to change a system, you need to align as many of those interests as possible and move them in a particular direction. I was saying earlier, the difference between international wash, as I've experienced it, which the US has been investing in for more than 60 years, and domestic wash work, which until recently really very few people knew was necessary if you weren't living without running water yourself. The difference is that, folks in the US feel so alone and abandoned and disconnected because they haven't been part of a networked approach before. And so early on in our work, we realized there was kind of something here. There are a bunch of actors in our space who touch water, who may be from universities or governments or regulatory agencies or communities or funders, but they don't call their work one thing and they never collaborated at scale. And that is something we do in the international wash sector. Folks come together in specific regions and they share data and they set common goals and they collaborate on the ground. And just because we had cut our teeth in international wash, we were taking the same approach in the US. And so when we wanted to get water to a special needs school on Navajo Nation, we went and tried to find a plumber, and we could only find one licensed plumber on the entire Navajo Nation, which is the size of West Virginia. And sort of that began a project between us, IAPMO, who writes the plumbing code for the US, the Arizona Plumbing Union, Navajo Technical University, to build this program where students could go to NTU and within a year and a half get a fully fledged certificate in plumbing and pipe fitting that would allow them to do that work on the Navajo Nation and get a path to apprenticeship. And so this is like, a really complex collaborative approach that involves us, an implementer, a regulator, labor, funders, universities, tribal governments, impacted community members, that's building a new pipeline of skilled labor for the Navajo Nation that can help really solve this problem over time. Vessel, our work is a platform for that kind of collective action at the national scale. And so at Dig Deep, we see ourselves as sort of the system orchestrator, helping everyone see themselves as part of this system, create a common language, set common goals, share information. And that's really about building power for proximate leaders who are doing this work in their communities. If you can build a coalition, build that collective power, not only, can you scale responses to these problems much more efficiently, but that group of people can come together and they can influence some of the most powerful actors that have the keys kind of to these solutions. The federal government, state governments, some private entities, investor and municipal and utilities. And I think at the heart of that coalition building work, no matter what sector you work in, whether you work in water or democracy or gender or smoking cessation or HIV/AIDS, it's really about, building a collective that's as close to the ground as possible, but that can ladder up to build that sort of power in a very nothing about us without us approach. This platform for collective action that is Vessel, it takes people from within the communities that we serve and it elevates them to this place of power where they can advocate for themselves, which is something that has been missing from the way we've approached problems in the US for a long time. And the last thing I'll say is that there is a lot of research lately on these platforms for collective action that create, really systems change goals to change the way funding works or the way infrastructure works or the way, topics like gay marriage or smoking cessation. And we know now that this is one of the most powerful investments that philanthropy can make because of research done by Bridgespan and Skoll and others, investing in these platforms for collective action that help people working on this problem who otherwise would be alone and isolated, come together to do something together that they couldn't do by themselves.
I love that. I mean, I think there's so much in what you shared from cross-contextual learning, based on your work in other places, how you brought that similar strategies to the US, how you're meeting people where they are, but then calling them to a greater purpose and collaboration with others by helping them see how, helping them see the work that they do through new lenses and then creating this kind of platform that connects the dots together through systems orchestration. So there are lots that we want to come back to, but those were some of the themes that really stood out to me. And to link it back to what Renata was saying, George, you mentioned it's also about bringing people to collaborate with each other, right? And so there's that element of capacity building, even if you don't call it that, within systems orchestration. And Renata, that links back to what you were talking about, Mosaic. How do you equip people in community to be the change agents that they are, but also aspire to continue to be? And so, you have a regional focus, particular community, change makers of color. But that's also a very diverse community. People come with different histories, different backgrounds, different ideologies. And so how do you think about, or how do you approach weaving, those elements of diversity to build solidarity, to build unity within the cohorts that you support?
Thank you. Yes. So let me explain a little bit about the Mosaic Fellowship, and then through that, how do we hope to achieve that? So the Mosaic Fellowship is a 1-year program. We bring together about 20 change makers from across the South for an intense experience that spans over 12 months. It's both immersive and virtual. We bring fellows together for a rigorous experience, but also intellectually rigorous, but also soul restoring, right? Like we're here to challenge ourselves, to learn more, to unlearn, but also to recharge and to rest and to step a little bit and maybe see ourselves in our work from a little bit of distance, not necessarily from being in it, but trying to see ourselves from a different perspective by our own experiences, but maybe through the eyes of the other change makers with which we're enjoying this experience. During those 12 months, we spent time deepening our critical analysis of other social movements. What can we learn from them? How do they relate to how we feel we are challenged, or how we see opportunities for progress? We certainly are trying to learn about our own histories, Latinos, Black, Asian American, Native Americans, deepen understanding of our own histories and of each other's. And through that, we hope that certainly that's where not only we understand our own contributions to this complex country, but it's also where we find both assertion of the enormity of the challenge in whatever way people are trying to improve their communities, but also where we feel enormous sense of empowerment for what is possible, because we see what others have done before us. I'm actually calling from Memphis, Tennessee. My peers downstairs, the Mosaic Changemakers, we have 20 leaders right now. This is one of our in-person retreats. I'm actually sitting right across the National Civil Rights Museum. And to be more precise, I get chills to say this, but I can see the balcony where Dr. King was shot, which is what became the Lorraine Motel, which became the Civil Rights Museum. We come here with a purpose. We are change makers from across the South, and we are not just only grounded in that we are people trying to bring our communities forward through our work in the arts and culture, through education, through public health, through civic engagement. It's an interdisciplinary group of people. We're also grounded by the fact that we do this work in the South, which has a particular experience, a particular history, and our own insertion in it. Some of us are born and bred here. Some of us came not only from somewhere else in the country, but from other places in the world. And it is important for us to ground ourselves in that because we feel that that is not only our challenge, but it's also the beautiful, fertile ground in which we exist. We are here in the place where all the civic leaders and civil rights leaders that have given us the country that we know today. And we are here to learn from their own experiences critically, with more nuance of what does it mean then to be leading in the South today. I would say that for us, what is important in that coming together is that we share two primary beliefs. And that's why Mosaic Changemakers come together in this way and opt in into this community. One, that our community struggles are interconnected. Regardless if you're working in cultural or arts, or if you're working for the environment or for public education, regardless if you're a Black leader, a Latina immigrant, or an Asian American who came from LA and now you find yourself in Memphis, our struggles are interconnected. And the second belief is that relationships of trust are foundational to achieving justice for any one community and for all of us. And that's where in the Mosaic Fellowship, we're just trying to create a space where we are taking the time to get to know each other so that we build trust between ourselves and hopefully then between our communities. We are taking time to discover our interdependence. And at the end, we hope that we're developing a vision for a future that is shared, where we see all of us. So the Mosaic Fellowship is both an investment in time, but it's also a recognition of the space and place where we are trying to achieve that change. Not only because this is home for all of us, but also because we understand the history, not only to the region, but to the rest of the country. So this is to say that while we are absolutely focused on the South, we know that what happens here will also inform and hopefully inspire, and hopefully it will change also what happens elsewhere. And I think that to us, weaving a better South is certainly, weaving a stronger civil society. And George was talking earlier about people, right? Like systems. And sometimes I get frustrated when people talk, system change. And it's like this very amorphous and think that we can touch. Systems are made of institutions who in turn are made of people. And so at Mosaic Fellowship, we insist that in order for us to make our communities better and change the systems that we feel are not serving our communities, is the people that are, at the end of the day, in relationship to each other, making change, leading change. And we got to start with the basics. Like, how do we relate to one another? How do we know with critical lens the history of our own communities and each other's? And from that, what's the future that we want to build together?
Thank you, Renata. Again, so many rich points that you've made, including around, kind of interconnectedness, interdependence, and which is something that I think we really need to lean into, particularly in moments, in the moment that we're in and during times of crises. But how do you create those web of relationships that enable you to then tap into that interdependence to build solutions that work? And then you also brought up the point about the importance of place, right? I think in various Aspen fellowships, we talk about the place as text. And I think you're really leaning into that by taking this place-based model with the vision, not only for the place, but also for the broader country. And so lots of important strategies and lessons that you've shared. Okay, we're getting really thoughtful questions from the audience. And so I'm actually gonna hold back the questions that I had planned and go straight to the audience questions. So the first question is for both of you. Maybe George, I'll call on you to go first. What unexpected alliances or partnerships have emerged through your work that have surprised or inspired you? And I'll give you a moment because it's a big question.
That's super interesting. So actually, this is a good place to blend in some of the stuff I just heard from Renata that I loved. This idea that systems are based on people, and that the sort of first work of systems change, if you want to call it that, is helping people discover their interdependency or the ways they rely on each other. I think that is that's the alchemy of this process. When we started Vessel, there were people working certainly on the issue of water and sanitation access in the US. There were university researchers, there are big associations like American Water Works. There are US groups doing this work outside the country, people like Water for People or Engineers Without Borders. There are folks that consider their work to be in the environmental space, for instance, or in the climate space. And the first job of anyone that wants to build a coalition is to create or really allow to come to the surface a common or shared identity among the people in that coalition. And yeah, that's the alchemy, because it can be very surprising. Vessel started with just 15 organizations from all across the water and wastewater sector in the US, and definitely some unlikely groups too. And we come together regularly in different working groups to advance policy solutions, or to prepare, say, remarks for a Senate hearing, or to, host a briefing in Capitol Hill, to share data, to advocate for better data collection. And we also come together in person every couple of years at the US WASH sector convening, because that sort of being in person is where I think those unexpected alliances really happen. They don't happen as easily over something like Zoom or an email. And so getting people, especially folks from frontline communities, hundreds at a time in a room to collaborate can yield some really cool stuff. I don't know if it's completely unexpected, but one of my proudest moments last year was, we had a panel of folks talking about water access solutions for communities that really are too far to hook into the grid. And someone was discussing trucking, using food grade water trucks to deliver water to people's homes where that's possible. And um, there was this sort of line of people off stage waiting to speak to that person after the presentation. And they were like, oh, that's so cool that you're doing trucking on Navajo Nation. We're doing it in, the rural Southwest, or we're doing it in Oklahoma on a different reservation, or, we're looking at that as a solution for, our work in Texas. And so these folks that had never met before and who had been pursuing independently the same kind of solution using the same kind of technology, I watched them get together over the course of that 3-day conference. At every break, they were always sitting at the same table. I think, sharing data, sharing best practices, and becoming this little ad hoc working group. And once you have that, you have this kernel of collective power that you can use to advocate for more flexible government funding that can be used to power water trucking, or to incorporate the trucking and technology sectors into this work, play with things like, Internet of Things devices and others that track these shipments of water and track the level in someone's tank. There are sort of data interventions, people sharing data on, okay, what's your trucking consumption look like in hot summer months versus in winter months? And are there times when roads become impassable? And what does that do to your ability to deliver? And watching this really complex set of questions, be shared in this collaborative forum, that's just one example. I mean, it's happening literally every week within the Vessel Collective. And it's really cool to see folks who were really working in very separate silos, considering their work very apart from each other, to come together with a new language and reframe that, like Renata said, based on really discovering in person, in real proximity to each other, their interdependency.
Thank you so much, George. That was really helpful, and also great to hear about the different elements that came together. Renata, I'm actually going to ask you a different question in the interest of time. So someone asked earlier, you mentioned facing a moment when you knew that you needed to take action, but you weren't sure how to do it. And so the question is, in a world filled with a lot of uncertainty, a lot of people are experiencing paralysis. They want to take the first step, but they're not unsure how to do it. What advice would you offer to someone who feels called to address an issue, but struggling with where to start? How did you navigate through your own uncertainty?
That's great. To be very clear, like it took me many years of collecting all of these experiences of feeling the urgency to create a space for leaders of color and communities of color to come together to develop deep bonds and get to know each other and build that trust that I felt was so instrumental to moving the South forward. And so, first of all, I think I was a first learner, like even in that journey of declaring. When I started at the beginning and I talked about feeling both the solidarity, but also the sense of separation, I also knew that I needed to learn a lot about this place that now was my home, the histories of the South. I needed to learn more deeply and more rigorously about Black history in this country. I needed to, yes, why is there suspicion? Why there might be feelings of competition, right? Like all these notions that are real and they are grounded in also real experiences. And so I first think we should take a learner stand, and with rigor and patience, dig more into the areas that we feel might illuminate, right? And I think that that's an important part. And then the second one would be to ask a lot of questions around you. I mean, I shared this. I was not the only one that was concerned about that, but I learned that others were also concerned about this, and by sharing that concern with others, right? Like there were other Black leaders right there in Nashville who also saw the need and opportunity to create a space where we would create a community. Again, some of us also struggle, like, how do we do that, right? Like we can get together for lunch once a month, but is that a structure that really is gonna create sort of that consistency and space that we need. We tried a couple of times, and actually at some point that went away because I was not a structure that was allowing us to do it. So I think it's okay also to take the time to learn and the time to speak with others, because we will find not only inspiration, but partners that see that. I think that certainly, and I know that George spoke about this earlier, I am here speaking to you on behalf of Mosaic Changemakers, but Mosaic Changemakers is the culmination of the thinking and conviction and dreams of other people that have added to the idea, have opened resources, had open connections. And I think it's understanding that that sort of question that we have about something we want to move on, we are not the only ones that are concerned about that you are concerned. And sometimes it's by sharing that concern, talking to people that might have ideas, people that we admire, people that might move in circles that we might feel intersect with that concern, is the most important thing. It took me many years to then be at the Pahara Aspen Fellowship and get the answer like, oh, this is how we could do it. But then I went back to the people that I knew were had that same interest and concern that I did, and proposed that this might be a way to go about it. And so I really feel that the most important thing that we can do to sort of find that path when we have this call to do something about something is to be a learner and to talk to a lot of people. I would say also that the tool of time. I know that right now it feels everything is urgent, and if anything, we feel the urgency to act and to do right now, and we absolutely must. But I think that it's also important to be counter-cyclical and make sure that we're taking the time to slow down, to gear up, right? I just don't know how we in a community of 20 leaders can deepen our sense about our own whys, recharge, learn, unlearn, and really assume the enormity in front of us if we don't slow down. I know it's counterintuitive, but I really feel that that's part of what we need to do collectively and then individually for those who are listening, who want to move onto some direction.
Thank you so much, Renata. Okay, I think I'm gonna go to our final question in the interest of time because I would love for both of you to respond to it. So the question is, and I think it connects to the last point you made, Renata, given the complex challenges both of you are addressing, how do you maintain momentum and prevent burnout? Find renewal, both personally and within your teams.
George, okay. Wow, yes. I would say,
Constant battle.
yeah. Let me start by saying that I feel an enormous sense of creativity. And I think it's because in moments of rupture and fracture, like the ones that we are experiencing, not just in this country, but in the world, there's no other way out of this than creating and building new things, right? Like here, I am telling you the name of the organization that I'm leading is Mosaic Changemakers. What's a mosaic? A thing, beautiful thing made of pieces, sometimes broken, that come from somewhere else. And we build something that didn't exist before. I think that we are at a moment in which we are all of us invited to use our creativity to create and build new things. What is like, if this economic system is not working for us, if this growing inequality is fracturing us even more, right? Like we just got to create. And sometimes just unleashing and allowing ourselves then to feel that we can create. And that sometimes is because somebody's writing more than you were, because you're putting your thoughts on paper, because you're sharing them with others, because you're exploring all the ways in which your ideas need to see the day of light. And that might be by just sharing them with somebody else. I think that we need to tap into our creativity. And by that, I don't mean like we all are artists, like I'm certainly don't consider myself one, but I think we all are creative. And I think that we do need to challenge that. And if that's also sometimes, watching movies or going more to museums, experience art. I think certainly I'm listening to more music and I am seeking visual artists that see the world and see things that I don't see. And I just love to try to like, oh, I wonder where this come from and how did they create this? And I think that in turn fulfills me with some energy for creativity and for also imagining what could I create with others. And so I really think that we need to lean on our creative power because this ruptured world needs new things to emerge. And we all need to be the seeds to harvest that later.
George.
I keep getting so much from this, Renata. Thank you. It's really wonderful to be in conversation with you. I think, especially post-COVID, it really feels to me like sometimes work can feel like a video game, something that is mediated through screens. You're looking at numbers, you're looking at data. Even if you know something is happening in the real world because of your efforts, you're often not, physically present to see that. And I think that can feel really alienating. And in that space, it's really difficult to maintain momentum and it's really difficult to prevent burnout because it all feels so abstract. And so I think, one of the powerful things about working through, groups of people or coalitions where you're interacting more deeply, where you're in person especially, is that you can recharge each other. And that your proximity, not only to the problem that you're solving, which can be very motivating, but to the solution that's being implemented, which can be incredibly inspiring, is super important. And I see that inside Dig Deep. I see that inside our organization where, there are more than 80 of us and almost half of us have lived without running water ourselves and come from the communities that we serve. And so there's already that powerful motivator there. But even that, pales in comparison to the motivation of watching someone turn on a tap in their house for the first time and watching what that, emotional moment looks like. Sometimes a shout of joy, sometimes a quiet tear, sometimes just, kind of silence and disbelief. And how powerful that proximity and that physicality and really the spirituality of that moment, connecting to other people in the work and watching it come to fruition in some small way is super powerful. And at the coalition level within Vessel, I've actually seen how that work that's happening in the field, the sort of struggle to solve these problems, reanimates other partners whose work really is more kind of virtual or data focused or policy focused. Putting them in rooms and in places and sometimes in homes and schools and churches with folks who are the most proximate to this problem and the solution. They're actually working within their community, implementing these technologies or these policy solutions or these funding mechanisms, and watching the way that just one sort of tangible win can reanimate everybody is incredibly powerful. So I agree with Renata that at the core of that, there's kind of this creative agency, as we explore solutions that really is such a powerful unifier and animator. And that's the thing I think that keeps me maintaining momentum and preventing burnout. Like whenever I'm feeling like, whoa, this is all so abstract and all I do is open my computer every day and solve problems via email and it's so stressful. And then you get a moment like I did last weekend on the Navajo Nation in someone's house, watching the water turn on for the first time, and you're with partners and you're with your staff and you're with the community and you're watching this one moment that is kind of the culmination in a very small sort of microcosmic way of everything you're all working on. If you can string a bunch of those moments together and it takes physical proximity, I think you can keep that engine of inspiration going indefinitely.
Thank you. I think for me, just being able to be in this conversation with you both is giving me a lot of energy and inspiration right now. So again, thank you so much to both of you and congratulations on this recognition. And also thank you to McNulty Foundation and the Aspen Institute for making this all possible. And I invite everyone to continue to get to know Renata and George and their work as well. By there are going to be links coming to you in the chat to learn more about their efforts. Also invite you to fill out a survey to share your feedback and reflections on this conversation today. And stay in touch because there's lots of really incredible work happening. And we look forward to hopefully you joining us for the next conversation and beyond. And again, much gratitude to you, Renata and George.
Thanks, Yordanos. Thanks, Renata.
Thank you. It's great. And Yordanos, it's so nice to join your community of McNulty Prize Catalyst Fund awardees. So looking forward to hanging out with you too.
Definitely.
Amazing. Thank you both.